Hello, my dear friends. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe. Welcome back to another evening of shared tales and quiet adventures. Tonight, we journey to old Ireland, to a time when the mist hung thick between our world and the other, when the hills themselves were doorways, and when tending a fire was not just work, but a sacred trust. We'll follow Brighid, pronounced Breed, a keeper of flames in a small village nestled against the fairy mounds, as she discovers that even the smallest light can illuminate the deepest mysteries. I truly love writing these gentle mythological tales, and I couldn't pass up the chance to explore the rich tapestry of Irish folklore. So if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, then consider checking out my Patreon linked down below. Brighid woke, as she always did, to the sound of silence. Not the absence of sound, but that particular quality of quiet that comes just before dawn, when even the birds are holding their breath, waiting for the sun to give them permission to sing. She lay still for a moment, watching the darkness of her small room gradually soften into grey, and listened to the crackle of embers in the hearth downstairs. Even from her bed she could tell by the sound whether the fire needed tending. This morning the coals whispered contentedly to themselves. She rose slowly, savouring the transition from sleep to waking. The stone floor was cool beneath her bare feet, a pleasant shock that finished the work of rousing her. She wrapped herself in her woolen shawl, the one dyed deep blue with woad, and padded to the small basin by the window. The water was cold, drawn from the well the evening before, and she splashed it across her face with a sharp intake of breath. Her room was simple, as befitted a hearthkeeper. A narrow bed with good wool blankets, a chest for her clothes, a small table with a clay lamp that she rarely needed to light, living as she did by the rhythm of fire and sun. On the wall hung her most precious possession, a gift from her mother before she passed. It was a bronze mirror, small and round, polished smooth as water. Brighid rarely looked into it, preferring to see herself reflected in the faces of those she served. She dressed in her working clothes, a linen shift soft from many washings, a wool dress the colour of peat, practical and warm, an apron that had once been cream-coloured but now bore the honourable stains of ash and soot and herb juice. She braided her dark hair thick and long, and pinned it in a crown around her head to keep it away from the flames. Her hands moved through these tasks with the ease of ritual, each gesture exactly as it had been yesterday and the day before and the day before that. There was comfort in repetition, she had learned. Down the narrow stairs she went, one hand trailing along the smooth stone wall. Her home was attached to the round house, the great circular building at the heart of their village of Dún-na-sí, pronounced Dún-na-sí, which meant the fort of the fairies. This was by design. The hearthkeeper must live close to the sacred flame, must be able to tend it at any hour, must sleep and wake with its presence. Brighid had lived here since she was 15, when old Morna, the previous hearthkeeper, had chosen her as apprentice. 10 years now she had served the flame. The round house was still mostly dark when she entered, though the eternal flame in its central pit provided a warm, steady glow. The building was ancient, its thick walls made of stone and earth, its high conical roof thatched with reeds. Around the central fire pit, arranged in a careful circle, were the hearthstones that marked the sacred space. Beyond them, benches and sleeping platforms for travelers or villagers who needed shelter. The walls were hung with herbs drying in bundles and tools for the Hearthkeeper's craft. Clay pots and iron kettles, wooden ladles and horn cups, baskets woven from willow. But first the flame. Brighid approached the fire pit with the same reverence she brought every morning. This was not just any fire. This was the sacred flame of Dun-na-Si, the heart of their village. According to the old stories, this flame had been kindled from a coal brought from the Otherworld itself, from the halls of the Tuatha De Danann, pronounced Tu-ahaha De Dan-an, the ancient magical people who had once ruled Ireland. The hero who brought it back, a woman whose name had been lost to time, had carried it in a bronze vessel, shielded from wind and rain, walking for 7 days and 7 nights without rest. For 300 years, or so the tale went, this flame had burned without going out. She knelt on the smooth stones, worn concave by generations of hearthkeepers, and studied the fire. At first glance, everything seemed well. The flames danced their eternal dance, yellow and orange with touches of blue at their base. The wood, carefully chosen ash and oak, burned steadily. The smoke rose straight and clean through the opening in the roof. But Brighid had tended this fire every day for 10 years. She knew its moods, its colors, its voice. The flame seemed, she hesitated to even think it, dimmer somehow. Not in its height or the amount of light it gave, but in some quality she couldn't quite name. It was like looking at a familiar face and sensing that the person behind it was troubled, even though they smiled as always. The fire was smiling, but something was wrong. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. She was tired, perhaps, or imagining things in the pre-dawn dimness. She set about her work, feeding the fire with the practiced motions of long habit. Small pieces first, placed just so to catch the flame. Then larger pieces, arranged in a careful pattern that allowed the air to flow freely. While the fire settled into its new arrangement, Brighid turned to the day's baking. Bread was always first. The people of Dun-na-Si would wake hungry, and nothing started a day better than warm bread with butter and honey. She had prepared the dough the night before, and it sat now in a great wooden bowl covered with a cloth, risen and ready. Her hands knew this work without thinking. She shaped the dough into rounds, pressing out the air, folding and turning. She had no need to count or measure. Her hands remembered. 8 loaves for the 8 families closest to the roundhouse who would come first thing for their bread. Another 6 for the travellers and shepherds who would pass through during the day. The loaves went onto the hot stones at the fire's edge, covered with an iron dome that trapped the heat. While they baked, filling the roundhouse with that incomparable smell of bread becoming, Brighid turned to her next task. Water must be fetched from the well for the day's cooking and cleaning. The morning air was crisp when she stepped outside, carrying the faint promise of rain. The sky was lightening now, pearl grey in the east where the sun would soon rise. The village was just beginning to stir. Smoke rose from the chimney holes of the round houses scattered across the hillside. A dog barked somewhere down the lane. The well stood in the centre of the village, a circular stone structure with a wooden roof to keep out leaves and rain. It was ancient, even older than the roundhouse, some said. Dug by hands long turned to dust. The water that rose in it was cold and clear and sweet, fed by some underground stream that flowed from the heart of the hills. Brighid lowered her buckets on their ropes, listening to the splash as they hit the water far below, then hauled them up hand over hand. She was turning to head back when a voice called out, "Brighid, wait a moment, if you would." It was Cormac, pronounced Cormac, the village leader. He was a tall man in his 50th year, with grey threading through his red beard and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He'd been chosen as leader not for his strength or his wealth, but for his fairness and his ability to listen before speaking. The village trusted him, and that trust had not been misplaced. "Good morning, Cormac," Brighid said, setting down her yoke carefully so the buckets wouldn't spill. "You're up early." "As are you, as always," he replied with a smile. Then his expression grew more serious. "I wanted to ask you something about the flame. Has it seemed... I don't know how to say this exactly. Has it seemed any different to you lately?" Brighid's heart gave a small jump, so she hadn't been imagining it. "What makes you ask?" Cormac rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "The past 2 mornings when I've gone to take a coal for my hearth, the flame seemed, well, lesser somehow. Not in size, you understand, but in presence, I suppose. My wife said I was imagining things, but this morning she mentioned it too, without my prompting." Brighid felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. "I noticed something this morning as well," she admitted. "A dimness I couldn't quite name. But I thought I was seeing things in the early light." "3 of us, then," Cormac said quietly. "That's not imagination. That's... well, what is that?" "I don't know," Brighid said, though even as she spoke old stories were stirring in the back of her mind. Stories old Morna had told her during her apprenticeship. Stories about what happened when a sacred flame began to fail. "But I'll watch it carefully today." Cormac nodded, though he didn't look reassured. "You're a good Hearthkeeper, Brighid. Better than we deserve, really. If anyone can tend to this, it's you." He paused. "But if you need help, if you need anything, you come find me. The flame is the village's heart. We all have a stake in keeping it burning." "I will," Brighid promised. "Thank you, Cormac." He nodded and headed off toward his own cottage, his stride just a bit less certain than usual. Brighid picked up her yoke again, but the water felt heavier now, burdened with worry. Back in the round house, she poured the water into the large clay vessels she kept by the hearth. The bread was ready, golden and perfect, and she removed the loaves with a wooden paddle, setting them on a clean cloth to cool. The first of the villagers would arrive soon for their morning bread, and she needed to be ready. But her eyes kept drifting back to the flame. In the growing daylight she could see it more clearly, and yes, there was definitely something wrong. The color was off, just slightly. Where it should have been a pure, clear yellow and orange, There were hints of grey at the edges. The flames moved sluggishly, as though tired. Young Neve, pronounced Neve, arrived first, as she always did. She was 12 years old, bright and eager, and she'd been begging Brighid to take her as apprentice since she was old enough to speak in full sentences. Brighid hadn't committed yet, wanting to be sure the girl truly wanted the life of a Hearthkeeper, with all its responsibility and sacrifice. "Good morning, Brighid," Niamh called cheerfully, her dark curls bouncing as she skipped into the roundhouse. "I've come to help just like always. What shall I do first? Shall I sweep or fetch more wood? Or help you with the— Oh!" She stopped, her smile fading. "Brighid, is the flame all right?" Out of the mouths of children, Brighid thought. Sad was exactly the right word. "I'm not sure yet, Niamh, but I'm watching it carefully." "Can I help?" the girl asked, all her usual energy focused now into earnest concern. "You can help by doing what you do best," Brighid said gently. "Keep me company. Tell me about your morning. Help me with the work. Sometimes the best help is just being present." So Niamh stayed, chattering about her dreams and her breakfast and the new calf that had been born at her uncle's farm while Brighid worked. Together they ground oats for porridge, mixed herbs for healing tea, and tidied the roundhouse. Other villagers came and went, collecting their bread, sharing news, warming themselves by the fire. Old Finian came in with his grandson helping him walk. "Aye," he said finally, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "Aye, she's poorly, isn't she? The flame, I can feel it." "You can?" Brighid asked, kneeling beside his bench. "I am old enough to remember the last time," Finian said. "I was just a boy, younger than young Niamh here. The flame dimmed then, too, turned grey at the edges, just like this. Old Morna, she knew what to do. She went on a journey, she did. 3 days and 3 nights. Came back with something I never knew what, and the flame burned bright again." Brigid's pulse quickened. "Old Morna never told me about that. What kind of journey? Where did she go?" Finian shook his head slowly. "She never said. But I remember the morning she left, she told my mother that she had to visit the threshold. That's the word she used, threshold. And when she came back, she seemed changed. Quieter, more at peace, maybe. The threshold." Brighid turned the word over in her mind. In the old stories, thresholds were places of power, doorways between this world and the other, boundaries where the rules changed. If old Morna had gone to a threshold, she'd gone to seek help from. From what? The Tuatha Dé? The spirits of the land? The ancestors? "Thank you, Finian," Brighid said softly. "That helps more than you know." The old man patted her hand with his gnarled fingers. "You're a good lass, Brighid. You'll know what to do when the time comes. The flame chose you, after all. It doesn't make mistakes about such things." After Finian left, Brighid stood alone in the roundhouse, watching the flame dance its increasingly weary dance. The day was full now, bright sunlight streaming through the door. But here, in the center, the fire seemed to be drawing into itself, pulling its light inward. That night, after the last of the villagers had gone to their homes, after young Neve had reluctantly departed, Brighid sat alone with the flame. She'd prepared everything for the morning. The bread dough was rising under its cloth. The wood was stacked and ready. The water vessels were full. Everything was in order. She wrapped herself in her thickest shawl and settled onto the stones near the fire pit, close enough to feel its warmth, but not so close as to be uncomfortable. The fire popped and hissed softly, speaking its wordless language. Brighid had spent enough time with fire to understand some of what it said. Tonight it spoke of weariness, of a strength that was fading. "I don't know what's wrong," she whispered to the flames, "but I promise you I'll find out. I'll help you. You've kept us safe and warm for so long. You've been the heart of this village since before my grandmother's grandmother was born. I won't let you go out. I won't." The flames seemed to flicker in response, and for just a moment, Brighid thought she saw something in their depths. A face, perhaps, or a path, or a beckoning hand. It was gone before she could be sure, leaving only the dancing light and her own reflection in the bronze hearthstones. She thought of old Morna, walking out into the night to seek the threshold. She thought of the stories she'd heard as a child, tales of brave souls who ventured into the Otherworld to retrieve what was lost or to gain what was needed. She thought of the ancient compact between her people and the powers that dwelled in the hills and hollows, a compact sealed by this very flame. And she thought of Cormac's words, "You're a good Hearthkeeper, Brighid. If anyone can tend to this, it's you." She stayed with the fire until the moon was high, watching and waiting and thinking. When she finally climbed the stairs to her room, exhausted but unable to sleep, she knew what she would do if the flame continued to fail. She would do what old Morna had done. She would seek the threshold. But not yet. Not unless it became absolutely necessary. For now, she would tend the flame with every skill she possessed. She would feed it the best wood, speak to it with prayers and songs, and give it all the care and attention a sacred flame deserved. Perhaps that would be enough. She lay in her narrow bed and listened to the wind picking up outside, rattling the thatch on the roof. Somewhere in the distance a dog howled. Closer, an owl called, its voice both beautiful and eerie in the darkness. Brighid pulled her blankets up to her chin and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would watch the flame even more carefully. Tomorrow she would try every remedy she knew. Tomorrow she would do everything in her power to keep the light burning. But deep in her heart, in that place where we keep the truths we're not quite ready to speak aloud, she already knew that her remedies would not be enough. The flame was calling her to a different kind of tending, a journey, a threshold, a meeting with powers greater and stranger than anything she'd known in her careful, ordered life. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she drifted toward sleep, she felt something else entirely. A strange, quiet excitement. A sense that her true work was finally about to begin. Outside, the wind sang through the village, carrying with it the scent of rain and wild places. And in the roundhouse below, the sacred flame burned on, dimmer than before, but not yet gone. Not yet. The next morning brought rain, a soft, persistent drizzle that turned the world grey and hushed. Brighid woke to the sound of it pattering against the thatch, a gentle rhythm that would have been soothing under other circumstances. But today the sound only heightened her sense of unease. Grey sky, grey rain, and below, in the round house, a flame that was losing its colour. She dressed quickly, foregoing her usual slow ritual, and hurried down the stairs. The round house was dim, dimmer than it should have been even with the overcast sky. The flame still burned, but Brigid's heart sank when she saw it. In just one night it had diminished further. The grey at the edges had spread, creeping towards the centre like frost on a window pane. She knelt by the fire pit and reached out her hands, not quite touching the flames, but close enough to feel their warmth. Except there was so little warmth to feel. "Oh," she whispered, "oh, what's happening to you?" The fire gave no answer, only continued its slow, tired dance. Brigid spent the morning trying everything she knew. She fed the flame with different woods: applewood for sweetness, hawthorn for protection, rowan for magic. She burned sacred herbs, vervain and sage and lavender, filling the round house with their smoke. She spoke prayers, the old words old Morna had taught her, words in a language older than the village, older perhaps than Ireland itself. Nothing helped. If anything, the flame seemed to dim further with each attempt, as though her efforts were exhausting it rather than strengthening it. By midday, when young Neve arrived with her usual cheerful energy, Brigid was sitting on the floor by the fire pit, her face streaked with soot and tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Brigid?" Neve's voice was small and frightened. "Brigid, what's wrong?" "The flame," Brigid said hoarsely. I don't know how to help it. Everything I try makes it worse." Niamh came and sat beside her, not speaking, just pressing close in the way of children who understand that sometimes presence is the only comfort. They sat together in silence, watching the dying flame. It was Cormac who found them there an hour later. He took one look at the fire, at Brigid's face, and his own expression hardened with resolve. "We need to call a gathering," he said. "Tonight. Everyone in the village. If the flame is failing, we all need to know. We all need to decide what to do." Brigid nodded mutely. She should have suggested this herself, but she'd been so focused on trying to fix it alone, so desperate to be the Hearthkeeper the village needed, that she'd forgotten the first rule old Morna had taught her. You are not alone in this work. The flame belongs to everyone. That evening, as the rain continued to fall, the villagers gathered in the roundhouse. They came with lanterns and candles, for the sacred flame now gave barely enough light to see by. They came quietly, speaking in hushed voices, their faces grave. Word had spread through the village during the day, carried by those who had come for their bread and seen the state of the flame. Everyone knew. Cormac stood by the fire pit and raised his hands for silence. "You all know why we're here," he said, his voice carrying through the roundhouse. "The sacred flame is failing. Brigid has tried everything she knows, but it continues to dim." "What can we do?" asked Mare, pronounced Moira, the weaver, her voice sharp with worry. We're just people. We're not magic workers or druids or whatever it would take to tend a flame from the other world. Old Finian, called out Deirdre, pronounced Deirdre the baker's wife. You remember the last time this happened. What did old Morna do? Finian stood slowly, leaning heavily on his walking stick. In the dim light he looked ancient, like a piece of the land itself given human form. Morna went to the threshold, he said, his voice stronger than his body suggested. She went to seek help from the old powers, the Tuatha de Danann. A murmur ran through the gathered villagers, excited and fearful in equal measure. The Tuatha de, said Oisin, pronounced O-Sheen, one of the younger men. But those are just stories, aren't they? Tales for children. Are they? Finian asked, gesturing to the dying flame. We've kept this fire burning for 300 years because of a coal brought from the Otherworld. We live in a village named for the fairy mounds. The threshold between our world and theirs runs right through these hills. Stories, maybe, but stories that are true. So someone needs to go, Cormac said slowly. Someone needs to make the journey Morna made, to cross the threshold and seek help. Every eye in the roundhouse turned to Brighid. She felt the weight of their gazes like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders. Of course it had to be her. She was the Hearthkeeper. The flame was her responsibility. And yet the thought of leaving the village, of venturing into the Otherworld, filled her with a terror she could barely name. I'll go, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. I'll leave at first light tomorrow. Not alone, said a new voice. Young Nerve stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. I'll go with you. Absolutely not, Brighid said immediately. Neve, you're 12 years old. I can't take you into the Otherworld. But you'll need help, Neve protested. And I know the stories as well as anyone. Better than most. My grandmother used to tell me tales every night. I know about the Púca, pronounced Púca, and the Cedar, pronounced she, and all the rules about iron and salt and rowan berries. The child has a point, Finian said, a hint of amusement in his voice. The old tales are full of companions. Heroes rarely journey alone. I'm not a hero, Brighid said quietly. I'm just a Hearthkeeper. All the more reason to bring someone with you, Cormac said gently, but not a child. Neve, your courage does you credit, but Brighid is right. This journey is too dangerous. Neve looked mutinous, but subsided, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. I'll go, offered Oisin. I'm young and strong. I can protect her. But Finian was shaking his head. No, lad. This isn't a journey for strength of arms. The Otherworld doesn't work that way. You can't fight your way through fairy doors. Then what does it take? Brighid asked, looking at the old man. Finian, you seem to know more about this than you've let on. What do I need? How do I prepare? Finian was quiet for a long moment, staring into the dying flame. When he spoke, his voice had taken on a distant quality, as though he were reciting something from deep memory. You'll need provisions, but simple ones, bread and cheese and water. The folk of the Otherworld value simplicity and honesty. You'll need gifts to offer, but again, nothing grand. A bit of cream, perhaps, some butter, fresh bread from your own hands, things made with care, and given freely. He paused, his eyes still on the flame. You'll need to know the roads and the rules. Don't eat fairy food unless you mean to stay forever. Don't give your true name unless you've been given a true name in return. Don't make promises you can't keep, and don't break promises you've made. Be courteous always, but don't be servile. How will I find them? Brighid asked. How do I cross the threshold? The threshold is everywhere and nowhere, Finian said. It's in the mist on the hills, in the space between trees, in the moment between waking and sleeping. But there are places where it's stronger, where the veil is thin. The old hawthorn on the north road, the one that grows alone, the standing stones in the high meadow, the spring that feeds our well, back in the hills where no one goes. And what intent is that? Brighid asked. Finian finally looked at her, and his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been reflected flame light. The intent to serve, the willingness to ask for help, not for yourself, but for those you care for. The Otherworld responds to need, Brighid. True need offered honestly. You have that. The flame is dying, and you would do anything to save it, not for glory or reward, but because it's your charge, your trust. The roundhouse was completely silent now, except for the soft patter of rain on the roof and the faint whisper of the dying flame. When old Morna went, Finian continued, she was gone 3 days and 3 nights. She came back, changed. Not harmed, mind you, but different. Quieter, as though she'd seen something that put the everyday world in a new light. She never spoke of what happened during those 3 days, but she lived another 20 years, and she was, well, at peace in a way she hadn't been before. Brighid felt something settle in her chest, a quiet certainty. I'll go, she said again. Tomorrow at dawn. But tonight I need to prepare. The villagers stirred, beginning to talk among themselves, making plans. Ma the weaver offered to pack food. Deirdre the baker promised fresh bread, still warm to carry. Oisin, looking disappointed not to be going himself, offered his warmest cloak. One by one they came forward with gifts for the journey. A water skin, a knife with a bone handle, a pouch of salt. Brighid accepted each gift with gratitude, feeling the weight of the villagers' care and concern settling around her like a cloak. She was not alone in this. Whatever happened in the Otherworld, she would carry her people with her. Young Neem was the last to approach. She held out her hand, and in it was a small carved wooden bird, smooth from much handling. My grandmother gave this to me, Niamh said, her voice thick. She said it was carved from rowan wood by her great-grandfather, and that it would bring safe passage. I want you to have it. Niamh, I can't take this, Brighid said, recognizing the treasure for what it was. You have to, Niamh insisted, because you have to come back. You have to come back and teach me to be a Hearthkeeper. You promised you'd think about taking me as apprentice, and you can't do that if you're lost in the Otherworld. Brighid took the little bird and closed her fingers around it. It was warm from Niamh's hand and surprisingly heavy for its size. I promise, she said. I'll come back. And yes, when I do, I'll take you as my apprentice. You've more than earned it. Niamh threw her arms around Brigid's waist and hugged her fiercely. Brighid hugged her back, blinking against sudden tears. The gathering broke up slowly, villagers drifting home through the rain, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the darkness. But several stayed to help Brighid prepare. They packed her bag with provisions, checking and rechecking each item. They filled her water skin with the clearest water from the well. They wrapped bread and cheese in clean cloth. Through it all, Brighid felt herself carried along by their care, their worry, their love. She had lived in this village her whole life, but she had always thought of herself as somewhat apart, set aside by her role as Hearthkeeper. Now she realized how wrong she'd been. She wasn't apart from them. Finally, as midnight approached, the last of the helpers departed, and Brighid was alone in the roundhouse with the dying flame. She sat by the fire pit one more time, her packed bag beside her, and spoke to the fire as though it could hear and understand. "I'm going to find help," she said softly. "I don't know if I'll succeed. I don't know if I'm brave enough or wise enough or whatever enough I need to be. But I'm going to try, because you've kept us warm and safe for so long, because you're part of us and we're part of you, because tending you is my life's work and I won't give up on you without a fight." The flame flickered just slightly, and for a moment Brighid could have sworn it burned a little brighter, a little warmer. Then it settled back into its dim, tired dance. She sat with it through the night, dozing occasionally, but never quite sleeping. Outside, the rain gradually stopped, and the clouds began to break apart, revealing patches of star-strewn sky. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon, the sky had cleared completely, washed clean by the rain. Brighid stood and stretched, her joints popping from sitting so long on the cold stone. She shouldered her bag, picked up her walking stick, and checked one more time that she had everything: bread and cheese, water, salt and rowan berries, the little carved bird from Neve tucked safely in her pocket, gifts to offer, a knife for cutting, not fighting, her warmest cloak. She was ready, or as ready as she would ever be. Cormac appeared in the doorway as the sun began to rise, along with Finian and Neve and several others who had come to see her off. They didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. Brighid hugged Neve one more time, clasped hands with Cormac, and received Finian's blessing, his gnarled hand resting briefly on her head. "Go with courage," the old man said, "and remember, the Otherworld is not our enemy. It's like a neighbor we've lost touch with. Approach them with respect and honesty, and they'll respond in kind." "I'll remember," Brighid promised. She looked one last time at the roundhouse, at the dying flame, at the faces of her people. Then she turned north, toward the old hawthorn tree on the north road, and began to walk. The morning was crisp and clean, the world washed bright by the rain. Birds sang in the hedgerows, the grass sparkled with dew. It was, Brighid thought, a beautiful day for a journey, even a journey into the unknown. Behind her, the village of Dúnasí grew smaller and smaller until it was lost to sight behind the curve of the hills. Ahead, the road wound into wilder country, toward the places where humans rarely went, where the old powers still held sway. Brighid walked steadily, her stick tapping a rhythm on the packed earth of the road. She didn't look back. There would be time enough for looking back if she returned. For now, there was only forward, only the journey, only the hope that somewhere ahead, at a threshold between worlds, she would find the help her flame needed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning mist, and Brighid walked on into the wild places, into the mystery, into the story that was just beginning. The old hawthorn tree stood alone on the north road, exactly where Finian had said it would be. Brighid had passed it countless times in her life, but she had never really looked at it before. Now, as she approached in the late morning light, she saw it with new eyes. It was ancient, that much was clear. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, almost like figures frozen in wood. Its branches spread wide, still bearing a few late berries bright red against the grey-brown bark. But it was the way it stood that caught Brighid's attention. The locals called it the watching tree, and now Brighid understood why. There was a quality to it, a presence as though it were aware and observing. Not hostile, but not quite welcoming either. Simply there, waiting. She stood before it, suddenly uncertain. How did one ask a tree for passage to the otherworld? What were the proper words Finian had said to approach with honest intent, but what did that mean in practice? In the end, she simply spoke from her heart, the way she spoke to the flame when she was alone in the roundhouse. "I'm Brighid," she said to the tree, "Hearthkeeper of Sea. The sacred flame is dying, and I need to cross the threshold to seek help. I don't know the right words or the proper ritual. I only know that I need to try. Will you let me pass?" For a long moment, nothing happened. The tree stood silent and still. A breeze stirred its branches, making the berries dance. Somewhere in the distance a crow called. Then, so gradually, she almost didn't notice it happening, the quality of the light began to change. The bright morning sunshine softened, became more diffuse, as though the air itself was turning to mist. The sounds of the ordinary world, the bird song and the rustle of grass and the distant bleating of sheep, began to fade, growing muffled and far away. Brighid's heart beat faster. This was it. The threshold. She was crossing. She stepped forward toward the tree, and the world shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not like stepping through a doorway or falling through a hole. It was more like turning a corner and finding yourself on a different street than you expected. One moment she was standing in a field, under the hawthorn tree. But what a forest! The trees here were taller than any she'd seen before, their trunks as wide as her roundhouse, their branches meeting overhead to form a canopy that filtered the light into a green-gold glow. Moss covered everything, thick and soft as sheep's wool, turning the forest floor into a carpet of emerald. Ferns grew in great arching sprays, some as tall as she was. Mushrooms clustered around the bases of trees in colors she'd never seen before. The air smelled different, too, richer somehow, fuller, like breathing in the essence of growing things, of life itself concentrated and distilled. Brighid stood very still, taking it all in, hardly daring to breathe. She'd crossed. She was in the Otherworld. The realization sent a thrill through her that was equal parts terror and wonder. A path wound between the trees, narrow but clear, marked by smooth stones that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Without really thinking about it, Brighid began to follow it. The path felt right, felt like it was leading her where she needed to go. She walked for what might have been minutes or might have been hours. Time felt strange here, elastic, like it was stretching and contracting according to rules she didn't understand. The forest remained beautiful but unchanging. The same towering trees, the same soft moss, the same filtered light. It should have been monotonous, but instead it was mesmerizing. She was jolted out of her reverie by movement ahead. Something was on the path, blocking her way. Brighid stopped, her hand going instinctively to the knife at her belt. Then she realized what she was seeing and had to stifle a laugh. It was a hare, just a hare, sitting in the middle of the path, watching her with bright, intelligent eyes. Except, she thought, looking more carefully, it wasn't just a hare. Its coat was the wrong color for one thing. Too red, almost russet, with white markings that formed patterns too regular to be natural. And it was too large, nearly the size of a small dog. "Hello," Brighid said cautiously, remembering Finian's advice about courtesy. "I don't mean to disturb you. I'm just passing through." The hare tilted its head, studying her. Then, to Brighid's amazement, it spoke. "Passing through, she says." The voice was high and amused, with a slight burr to it, like gravel rolling in a stream, as though one simply passes through the Threshold Woods, as though this were a common road and not a place between places. Brighid's mouth fell open. She'd expected strangeness in the Otherworld, but a talking hare was somehow both exactly what she'd anticipated and completely beyond her imagination. I'm sorry," she managed. "I didn't mean to be presumptuous. I need help. The sacred flame in my village is dying, and I was told I might find aid here." The hare's nose twitched. Sacred flame, dying village, seeking aid. Yes, we know. Did you think your need was a secret? The Otherworld hears such things. The question is not whether you seek, but whether you're worthy to find. "I don't know if I'm worthy," Brighid said honestly. "I'm just a Hearthkeeper. But the flame, it's not about me. It's about all the people who depend on it. They deserve help, even if I don't." "Honest, at least," the hare said, sounding pleased. "That's something. Too many mortals come here with pretty speeches and false faces, thinking they can trick or charm their way to what they want. But the Otherworld sees through such things. We see the truth beneath, The hare stood on its hind legs, impossibly balanced, and seemed to grow slightly, or perhaps Brighid shrank slightly. The perspective shifted in a way that made her dizzy. "I am Púca," the hare said. And yes, that was definitely a capital letter Brighid heard in the name. Shapeshifter, trickster, guide to the lost, and when the mood takes me, helper of honest seekers. You may call me Puck for short, if you like. Most do. "I'm Brighid," she replied, then hesitated. "Should I have given you my name? I was told not to." Puck laughed, a sound like water over stones. "Clever girl. But I asked for nothing. You gave freely. That's different. Names have power here, it's true, but only when taken without permission. Given freely, they're simply courtesy." The hare, Puck, dropped back to all fours and began hopping along the path. "Come along then, Brighid of the dying flame. If you're to seek the cedar, you'll need guidance. The threshold woods are not kind to those who wander without purpose." Brighid hurried to follow, her pack bouncing on her back. "The seedy? I'm going to meet the seedy? Well, you didn't think you could fix a flame from the Otherworld without consulting those who gave it, did you?" Puck called back. "The Tuatha De Danann kindled that fire. Only they can tell you how to rekindle it. But I thought Finian said there were different thresholds, different places I might find help." "And there are," Puck agreed, bounding over a fallen log with ease. Brighid had to scramble over it more awkwardly. But the woods choose the path, not the walker. You entered through the watching tree, and the woods have decided you should visit the northern hall first. Fionnuala's domain. She's, well, you'll see." They walked in silence for a while, Puck setting a brisk pace that had Brighid breathing hard. The forest began to change around them. The trees grew even taller, their bark taking on a silvery sheen. The moss became thicker, more luminous. "Puck," she said after she'd caught her breath, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask," the hare replied. "Whether I'll answer is another matter. Why are you helping me? I haven't offered you anything. I haven't made any bargains." Puck stopped and turned to look at her, and for a moment, in a trick of the light, Brighid saw not a hare but something else. A tall, lean figure with fox-red hair and a sharp, clever face. Then she blinked, and it was just a hare again. I help because it pleases me to help," Puck said simply. "The Púca are creatures of whim and fancy. We do what we do because we choose to, not because we must. Today, I choose to guide an honest Hearthkeeper who speaks to flames and cares for her people. Tomorrow I might choose to lead a pompous knight in circles until he admits he's lost. We are what we are." "That's actually quite freeing, I think," Brighid said. Puck's ears perked up. "Oh, how so?" "No expectations," Brighid said, thinking it through as she spoke. "No one telling you what you should be or how you should act. Just being what you are and doing what feels right." "Exactly so," Puck said, and there was approval in the voice now. "You understand more than most mortals. They're so bound up in their should and their must that they forget their could and their might. It makes them dull. But you tend a sacred flame, yes? That's duty, certainly. but you chose it. You could have been many things, but you chose to be a Hearthkeeper." "I did," Brighid said, surprised by the insight. "Old Morna asked if I wanted to apprentice, and I said yes because it felt right, because I loved the fire and the work and the way it connected me to people." "There," Puck said, satisfied. "Choice and duty all tangled together. That's the way of the best mortals. The ones who know that true freedom isn't the absence of obligation, but the ability to choose your obligations freely." They walked on, and Brighid found herself thinking about Puck's words. She'd never questioned her role as Hearthkeeper, never really examined why she'd chosen it. She'd simply known the way you know the sun will rise, that this was her path. But it had been a choice, hadn't it? And she could have chosen differently. The forest opened ahead into a clearing, and Brighid gasped. In the center of the clearing stood a hill, but not a natural hill. It was too perfectly shaped, too regular, a great dome of earth covered in grass so green it almost glowed. Around its base, standing stones had been placed in a circle, tall monoliths carved with spirals and symbols that hurt to look at directly. And at the hill's southern face there was a door. Not a door in the hill, but a door that was the hill, an opening that led into darkness, into earth, into somewhere that was both beneath and beyond. The edges of the doorway were carved from stone, and they were covered in more of those spiral patterns, interlocking and endless. "The Northern Hall," Puck announced. "Home of Fionnuala of the Seedy, keeper of northern winds, holder of ancient memories. She who watches over the borders between." Brighid swallowed hard. Should I just go in? That would be terribly rude," Puck said, sounding shocked. "You must announce yourself. Make your presence known. Ask permission to enter. The Seedy are sticklers for courtesy." Brighid approached the doorway, her heart pounding. Up close, she could see that the darkness beyond the door wasn't truly dark. It was more like the darkness had texture, had depth, was a thing in itself rather than the absence of light. She cleared her throat and spoke, loud enough to be heard, but not so loud as to be shouting. "My name is Brighid, Hearthkeeper of Dunnassi. I seek audience with Fionnuala of the Cedar. I come seeking help for a sacred flame that is dying. I ask permission to enter and speak." For a moment, nothing. Then, from deep within the hill, a voice answered. It was a woman's voice, cool and clear as spring water, with an accent Brighid couldn't place, something ancient and musical. "Enter, Brighid of the Hearth. You are expected." "Expected?" Brighid exchanged a glance with Puck, who had settled into a sitting position and seemed content to wait. "You're not coming?" Brighid asked. "The Púca serve no one," Puck said primly. "We go where we please, and only where we please. Inside the halls of the cité is not a place that pleases me today. But I'll wait here. When you emerge, if you emerge, I'll guide you to the next threshold." "If I emerge?" Brighid repeated faintly. "Oh, you'll emerge," Puck said cheerfully. Probably. You're honest and your need is true. The Cedar respect that." "Probably." "That's not very reassuring." It wasn't meant to be, Puck replied. Now go on. Don't keep Fionnuala waiting. She's patient by immortal standards, but that's still not very patient at all. Brighid took a deep breath, adjusted her pack, and stepped through the doorway into the hill. The darkness swallowed her immediately, but only for a moment. Then light bloomed around her, soft and silver coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. She was in a corridor wide and tall, carved from living stone. The walls were smooth as glass, but when she looked closely, she could see scenes carved into them. Forests and rivers and mountains, battles and feasts and dances. The corridor sloped gently downward, and Brighid followed it because there was nowhere else to go. Her footsteps echoed despite the moss-like substance that carpeted the floor. The air was cool and still, and with each breath she felt like she was breathing in time itself. Layers upon layers of years condensed into this space beneath the earth. The corridor opened into a hall, and Brighid stopped, stunned. The hall was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow far above. Pillars of stone rose like trees, their surfaces carved with the same spiral patterns as the door. Between the pillars, the air shimmered with lights, like fireflies but brighter, more deliberate, moving in patterns that suggested they were alive and aware. At the far end of the hall, on a seat carved from a single piece of white stone, sat Fionnuala. She was, Brighid thought, exactly what a fairy queen should look like. Tall and slender, with hair the colour of moonlight that fell past her shoulders in waves. Her face was ageless, neither young nor old, beautiful in a way that was almost frightening, like staring at a storm or a mountain and seeing the terrible beauty in its power. But it was her eyes that held Brighid frozen. They were silver too, but not the silver of metal, the silver of starlight, of ice, of things that were beautiful and deadly and entirely other. They looked at Brighid with an intelligence so vast and ancient that for a moment she felt like an insect being examined by a curious child. "Brighid of the Hearth," Fionnuala said, and her voice filled the hall without echoing. "Welcome to my domain. I am Fionnuala, daughter of the Danann, keeper of the northern winds, watcher of the threshold. Your sacred flame dims, and you have come seeking knowledge to rekindle it." It wasn't a question, but Brighid answered anyway. "Yes, my lady. I don't know what's wrong with it, but every remedy I've tried has failed. I was told that only those who gave the flame could tell me how to restore it." "Told truly," Fionnuala said. "The flame you tend was kindled from a coal taken from our hearth, carried to your world 300 years ago by one of your people who showed great courage and determination. It was meant to be a bridge between our peoples, a reminder that we are not so different, your kind and mine. We both need warmth. We both need light." She stood, and the movement was like watching water flow uphill, graceful and impossible. But flames, like all living things, have their seasons. They burn bright, they dim, they must be renewed. Your flame has reached the end of one cycle. To begin another, you must learn what feeds it. Not wood, though wood is important. Not air, though air is necessary. But something deeper. Brighid waited, hardly daring to breathe. "I will teach you the first lesson," Fionnuala said. But you must earn it, not through combat or cleverness, but through understanding. Come." She glided toward a smaller door at the side of the hall, and Brighid hurried to follow, her pack bumping against her back. Through the door was another chamber, smaller and warmer, with a fire burning in a central hearth. But it was like no fire Brighid had ever seen. It burned without wood, without coals rising from the stone itself in tongues of blue and gold and silver. And yet it was clearly a fire. She could feel its warmth, see the light it cast, even hear the faint crackling that fires make. "This is the eternal fire of the Northern Hall," Fionnuala said. "It has burned for 1,000 years, and it will burn for 1,000 more. Tell me, Hearthkeeper, what feeds this flame?" Brighid approached the fire carefully, studying it. She knelt, as she did before her own sacred flame, letting her senses extend, trying to understand what she was seeing. No wood meant no fuel in the traditional sense. No coals meant no ember to sustain it, and yet it burned, steady and strong and beautiful. She closed her eyes, remembering every fire she'd ever tended. The cook fires and the signal fires and the ceremonial fires, and most of all, the sacred flame. She thought about what made them burn, really burn, not just in the physical sense, but in the deeper sense. Why did people gather around fires? Why did they need them even in summer when the nights were warm? Memory, she said suddenly, opening her eyes. It's fed by memory, by the stories told around it, by the people who've gathered here, and the words they've spoken and the warmth they've shared. Every conversation, every song, every tale, it all goes into the fire and keeps it burning. Fionnuala's expression didn't change, but Brighid sensed approval. "Close," the Fairy Queen said, "but not quite complete. What else?" Brighid thought harder, reaching for something just beyond her grasp. Memory, yes, but what created memories? What made them worth keeping? "Connection," she said slowly. "The fire burns on connection, on the bonds between people. When they gather around a fire, they're not just sharing warmth. They're sharing themselves, their stories, their fears, their joys. The fire witnesses that sharing holds it, becomes stronger because of it." "Better," Fionnuala said. "And there was more." Brighid could feel it, could almost touch it. She stared into the impossible flame, letting her mind drift, letting the answer come to it rather than chasing it. And then she understood. "Love," she whispered. "Not romantic love necessarily, but care. The fire burns on care, on the deliberate choice to tend it, to feed it, to keep it alive, not because you must, but because you want to, because it matters to you, because the people who warm themselves by it matter to you." Fionnuala smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Yes," she said simply. "Memory, connection, care. These are what feed eternal fires, what have always fed them. Wood and air and spark are necessary, but without these deeper fuels, a fire is just burning. It has no soul, no purpose. Your sacred flame dims because these fuels have been forgotten." The words struck Brighid like a physical blow. She thought of the villagers, coming each morning for their bread and coals, taking them without thinking, without acknowledging what they were taking. She thought of herself, tending the flame out of duty, but rarely out of love. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you." Thank you for showing me. Understanding is only the first step, Fionnuala warned. You must take this knowledge and use it. Return to your people and teach them to remember, to connect, to care. Tend your flame with love and teach others to do the same. Only then will it burn bright again. She reached into her dress and pulled out something that glittered in the firelight. A branch, slender and silver, with tiny bells hanging from it that chimed with a sound like distant music. Take this, Fionnuala said, offering it to Brighid. A branch from the silver apple tree that grows in our orchards. When you return to your world, hang it near the sacred flame. Its bells will remind your people to pause, to notice, to remember what the fire means, and it will remind you as well. Brighid accepted the branch with trembling hands. It was lighter than it looked, and warm to the touch, and the bells sang softly at her movement, a sound that made her think of laughter and running water and dawn breaking over hills. Thank you, she said again, and meant it with all her heart. Thank you, Lady Fionnuala. The fairy queen inclined her head. You are welcome, daughter of hearth and home. But your journey is not finished. You have learned the first lesson, but there are others you must seek. Go forth from my hall and continue your quest. The woods will guide you to the next threshold, and there you will learn what you must learn. How many thresholds? Brighid asked. How many lessons? As many as you need, Fionnuala replied. The Otherworld shapes itself to the seeker's need. Trust the path, Brighid. Trust your heart, and remember what you have learned here. Brighid bowed deeply, clutching the silver branch to her chest. Then she turned and walked back through the great hall, past the pillars and the dancing lights, back to the corridor that led to the surface. When she emerged from the hill, blinking in the soft twilight of the threshold woods, she found Puck waiting exactly where she'd left him. The hare looked up at her, at the silver branch in her hands, and its nose twitched with interest. Well, well, Puck said. You survived your first encounter with the seed hay, and you came away with a gift no less. Fionnuala must have found you worthy. She taught me, Brighid said, still feeling dazed from the encounter. She taught me what feeds a sacred flame. And did you listen? Puck asked shrewdly. Yes, Brighid said, I listened. Good, Puck said, standing and shaking out its fur. Then come along. Daylight is fading, such as daylight is in this place, and you'll want to reach the next threshold before full dark. Even the Otherworld has things that walk at night, and not all of them are friendly. Brighid followed the shapeshifter back into the forest, the silver branch chiming softly with each step, its music a reminder of the lessons she'd learned and the lessons yet to come. They walked through the threshold woods as evening deepened around them, though Brighid was beginning to suspect that evening here was more a state of being than an actual time of day. The light shifted constantly, sometimes brightening to something like afternoon sun, sometimes dimming to dusk, following no pattern she could discern. The silver branch hung from Brighid's pack now, tied securely with a leather cord. Its bells chimed softly with each step, a gentle counterpoint to the sounds of the forest. Birds that weren't quite birds sang in the canopy above. Streams that ran uphill babbled somewhere in the distance. How much farther? Brighid asked, as the path began to slope downward. To where? Puck replied, not looking back. To the next threshold. You said there were more lessons. Oh, that, Puck said. We're nearly there. Can't you hear it? Brighid listened, straining her ears beyond the bells and the birdsong and her own footsteps. And yes, there it was. The sound of running water, but not like a stream. Deeper, more resonant, like water falling from a height into a pool. The path curved between two massive oak trees, their trunks so wide that three people holding hands couldn't have circled them, and opened onto a sight that made Brighid stop and stare. They stood at the edge of a natural amphitheatre in the forest floor, a bowl of earth perhaps 50 feet across, with walls of moss-covered stone rising on 3 sides. At the center of this bowl was a well, but calling it merely a well was like calling the ocean merely water. It was ancient, its stones worn smooth by countless years of wind and rain and hands drawing water from its depths. But it was the well itself that drew Brighid's eye and held it. The water within was so clear it looked like air, like looking through a window into depths that went down and down forever. And in those depths shapes moved. Connla's well, Puck announced, sitting back on its haunches with obvious satisfaction. One of the 5 sacred wells of Ireland, though this is the one that exists in both worlds at once. The hazelnuts that fall from these trees hold all wisdom, and the salmon that swim in the well eat the nuts and gain that wisdom themselves. It's quite the system. I've heard of this place, Brighid breathed. In the old stories, they say if you drink from the well, you gain knowledge of past and future. Well, yes and no, Puck said. You gain knowledge, certainly, but not the kind you might expect. Not lottery numbers or the names of your future children, more like understanding, perspective. A figure appeared from behind one of the hazel trees, and Brighid jumped, her hand going to her knife, but Puck made a reassuring sound, something between a purr and a chirp. Calm yourself, Hearthkeeper. That's just Boann. She tends the well, has done since time out of mind. The figure approached, and Brighid saw that it was an old woman, bent with age, dressed in simple grey robes. Her hair was white as snow, bound back in a single braid that hung to her waist. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were bright and sharp, missing nothing. She walked with the help of a gnarled staff, but her movements were steady and sure. Púca, the old woman said, her voice dry as autumn leaves. You've brought another seeker. As you knew I would, Boann, Puck replied. Nothing happens at the well without your knowing. The old woman's eyes fixed on Brighid, and Brighid felt that same sensation she'd felt with Fionnuala, of being seen, truly seen down to the core of who she was. But where Fionnuala's gaze had been like starlight, cold and beautiful and distant, Boann's was like earth, warm and solid and grounding. And Sir Brighid of Dunnassi, Boann said. It wasn't a question. Hearthkeeper, tender of the sacred flame, you've already visited Fionnuala's hall, I see. She nodded at the silver branch. And she taught you well, no doubt. But knowing what feeds a flame and understanding how to sustain it day after day, those are different things entirely. Yes, my lady, Brighid said, bowing respectfully. I'm here to learn whatever you can teach me. Boan's expression softened slightly. Not my lady, just Boan. I'm no queen, just a keeper of waters, same as you're a keeper of flames. We're not so different, you and I. She turned and began walking toward the well, gesturing for Brighid to follow. Puck, Brighid noticed, stayed where it was, settling down in the grass to watch from a distance. The well has been here since before there were names for places, Boan said as they walked. The hazels have grown and died and grown again 100 times. The salmon have swum these waters for ages beyond counting, and through it all someone has tended this place, drawn the water, cleaned the stones, gathered the nuts, fed the fish. Simple work, humble work. They reached the edge of the well, and Brighid looked down into its depths. The water was even clearer up close, so pure it seemed almost unreal. The silver shapes she'd seen were indeed fish, salmon, moving through the water with a lazy grace. They were beautiful, each scale catching the light and throwing it back in rainbow colors. "Oh, why are you telling me this?" Brighid asked softly. "Because I think you know in your heart that grand gestures and dramatic moments aren't what keeps sacred things alive," Boan said. She set down her staff and knelt by the well, and despite her age, the movement was fluid and easy. "You've tended your flame for 10 years, day in, day out, morning and evening and midnight. You've fed it and cleaned around it and kept watch over it. That's not glamorous work." She reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out a handful of hazelnuts, the same glowing ones that lay scattered under the trees. One by one, she dropped them into the water. "This is what I do," Boan said, "every day, twice a day actually. Morning and evening. I gather the nuts, I feed the fish, I clean the stones, I draw the water. It's the same every day, the same task, the same rhythm, the same routine. Do you know what that teaches you?" "Patience," Brighid guessed. "That," Boan agreed. "But more than that, it teaches you devotion. The kind of devotion that doesn't need novelty or excitement to sustain it. The kind that finds meaning in repetition, that understands that sacred work is often simple work, done over and over with care and attention." She stood, brushing her hands on her robes. "Fionnuala taught you that your flame feeds on memory and connection and care. I'm here to teach you that care isn't a feeling. It's an action. It's the choice to tend something day after day, even when it's hard, even when it's boring, even when no one else is watching." Brighid thought about her own mornings. The routine of feeding the flame, baking the bread, fetching the water. She'd done it so long it had become automatic, something she did without thinking. Had she lost the sense of devotion in all that repetition? Had it become just going through the motions? "I think I've been doing it wrong," she said quietly. "I've been tending the flame because I should, because it's my duty, not because I choose to each day anew." "And so now you're understanding," Boan said, approval in her voice. "Duty without devotion is just drudgery. But devotion transforms the mundane into the sacred. Every action becomes a prayer when you do it with your whole heart." She gestured to a wooden bucket sitting by the well, Help me with the day's work, Brighid. Learn by doing. And so Brighid spent the next hours, if they were hours in this timeless place, working alongside Boan. They gathered hazelnuts from beneath the trees, sorting out the ones that had fallen too long ago, keeping only the freshest. They fed the salmon, watching the fish rise and circle and dive with their precious cargo of wisdom. They drew water, bucket after bucket, to pour into the channels that ran from the well to water the hazel trees. It was hard work, physical work, and Brighid felt her muscles protesting. But there was something deeply satisfying about it, too. As they worked, Boan talked. Not about grand things or magical secrets, but about the small observations of a life spent in one place, tending one thing with complete attention. "See how this tree's leaves are yellowing at the tips," she said, touching one of the hazels. "That means the soil beneath it needs more water. The roots go deep, but even deep roots can thirst, so tomorrow I'll spend extra time on this channel, make sure it gets what it needs." Later, as they scrubbed the stones, she pointed to a crack that Brighid hadn't noticed. "This appeared last winter. Ice, probably, getting into a weak spot and expanding. I've been watching it. If it gets bigger, I'll need to repair it before it compromises the well's integrity. Small problems, tended early, stay small, ignored, they become disasters." And later still, as they gathered the last of the hazelnuts, Boan paused to watch the sun, or what passed for sun in this place, sink lower toward the horizon. "Every evening I watch the light change," she said softly. "I've seen it thousands of times, tens of thousands, and it's never the same twice. That's the gift of repetition, Brighid. When you do something often enough, you start to see the variations, the subtle differences. You develop an eye for nuance." By the time they finished, Brighid was exhausted, her hands rough from work, her back aching from bending and lifting. But she felt strangely more peaceful than she had in years. They sat together by the well as the evening deepened, and Boan produced a simple meal from her bag. Bread and cheese and apples, ordinary food made extraordinary by hunger and good company. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the water and the evening birds and the soft rustle of the hazel leaves. "I understand now," Brighid said finally, "what you've been teaching me. It's not just about doing the work. It's about being present while you do it, paying attention, caring about each small action." "Yes," Boan said simply. "When you return to your flame, don't just feed it. Notice how it burns. See how the wood catches, how the smoke rises, how the heat spreads. Don't just bake bread. Feel the dough under your hands, smell it rising, watch the crust brown. Don't just draw water. Appreciate its clarity, its coolness, the way it flows." She reached into her robes and pulled out a small crystal vial stoppered with a cork. Inside, water from the well swirled and glimmered. "Take this," Boan said, pressing it into Brighid's hands. "Water from Conla's well. When you return to your village, add 3 drops to your sacred flame each morning. Not for any magical property, though it has those, but as a reminder." Brighid accepted the vial with trembling hands, cradling it like the precious thing it was. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for your time, for your teaching, for your patience." Boann smiled, and in that smile, Brighid saw something that made her breath catch. For just a moment, the old woman's form seemed to shimmer, to shift, and beneath the bent back and the white hair, Brighid glimpsed something else. Someone young and strong and beautiful, with eyes like river water and hair like foam. A goddess in truth, not just in name. Then it passed, and Boann was just an old woman again, smiling her quiet smile. "The greatest magic is the magic of showing up," Boann said. "Day after day, that's the secret. Not spells or enchantments or dramatic gestures. Just the quiet, steady determination to tend what you've been given, to care for what matters, to keep showing up even when it's hard." She stood, groaning slightly as her knees cracked, and offered Brighid a hand up. "Your path continues, Hearthkeeper. Púca will guide you to the next threshold. But remember what you've learned here." Brighid bowed deeply, the crystal vial safe in her pocket, the silver branch chiming softly on her pack. "I will remember, I promise." She walked back to where Púca waited, and the shapeshifter stood and stretched, its form rippling in a way that suggested it might not stay a hair much longer. "Learn well?" Puck asked. "Very well," Brighid replied. Good," Puck said, "because the night grows deep, and you've 2 more thresholds to visit before your quest is complete. Come along, then. We've ground to cover, and time is whatever it is in this place, but we should still be moving." Brighid cast one last look back at the well. Boann had already returned to her work, moving around the hazel trees with her staff and her bucket, tending, caring, showing up. The image burned itself into Brighid's mind, a reminder of what true devotion looked like. Then she turned and followed Puck deeper into the threshold woods, toward whatever lessons still awaited her in the mysterious lands between worlds. The path wound upward now, climbing into hills that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had always been there and she simply hadn't noticed. The stars were coming out overhead, but they weren't the stars Brighid knew. These were brighter, closer, arranged in patterns that formed pictures she could almost but not quite understand. A silver road of light stretched across the sky, and Brighid remembered her grandmother's stories of the pathway the ancient heroes took to reach the Otherworld. "Puck," she said, as they crested a hill and paused to catch their breath. "How long have I been gone? From my world, I mean." The hare, which had indeed been shifting forms throughout the walk and was now something between a hare and a fox, tilted its head. "Hard to say. Time runs differently here. Could be hours, could be days, could be no time at all. Why? Worried?" "The flame," Brighid said. "If I'm gone too long, it might go out completely." "Ah, but that's the thing about time in the Otherworld," Puck said. "When you return, you'll find you've been gone exactly as long as you needed to be gone. No more, no less. The world adjusts itself to the seeker's need. It's one of the perks of questing in magical lands." "That's actually very convenient," Brighid said. "Isn't it, though?" Puck agreed cheerfully. "Now, come on. We're almost to the 3rd threshold, and this one is, well, you'll see. It's different from the others." They walked on into the starlit night, the heather soft beneath their feet, the wind carrying scents of distant seas and wild places. And ahead, just visible on the horizon, a light flickered, warm and golden and welcoming, like a hearth fire in a cottage window, calling travelers home. Brighid picked up her pace, drawn by that light, eager to learn the next lesson, to gather the next piece of understanding that would help her save her sacred flame. Behind her, the silver bells chimed. In her pocket, the crystal vial stayed cool and safe, and in her heart, new understanding was taking root, growing like a hazel tree, promising wisdom yet to come. The journey continued. The lessons deepened, and with each step Brighid was becoming not just a hearthkeeper, but a keeper of sacred knowledge, a student of devotion, a guardian of the small and essential magics that kept the world turning day after day in its endless, beautiful dance. The cottage appeared so suddenly that Brighid almost walked past it. One moment there was nothing but moorland stretching into the starlit darkness, and the next, tucked into a small hollow between two hills, there stood a house. It was small and simple, built of whitewashed stone with a thatched roof that looked thick and well maintained. Smoke rose from the chimney carrying the scent of burning peat and something else, something that made Brighid's stomach rumble. Cooking food. Real food, the kind you didn't find in the Otherworld unless someone was making it deliberately. Warm light spilled from the windows, and as they drew closer, Brighid could hear music. Someone inside was playing a harp, the notes falling like water, like rain, like tears and laughter all mixed together. Puck, who had settled back into the form of a hare, sat on its haunches and twitched its nose at the cottage. "Well then," it said, "looks like the wanderer has decided to rest here tonight. How fortunate for you." "The wanderer?" Brighid asked. "You'll see," Puck replied, in that maddeningly vague way it had. "This is your third threshold, Hearthkeeper. The lesson here is, well, different from the others. Less about duty and devotion, more about, how to put it? About the fires that burn in the heart, not just in the hearth." Before Brighid could ask what that meant, the cottage door opened, and a young man stood framed in the light. He was beautiful. There was no other word for it. Not handsome in the rough, weathered way of the men in her village, but beautiful in the way of things that shouldn't quite exist in the mortal world. Tall and slender, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes that were impossibly blue, like the sky on a perfect summer day. "A traveler," he said, and his voice was like his harp playing, musical and rich. "How wonderful! I was just thinking how quiet the evening was, and here you are to break the silence. Please come in. There's stew on the fire and bread fresh baked." Brighid glanced at Puck, who made a shooing gesture with one paw. "Go on, then. I'll wait out here. Thresholds are for seekers, not for the likes of me tonight." Still uncertain, but drawn by the warmth and the smell of food, and the genuine welcome in the young man's voice, Brighid stepped up to the cottage door. "Thank you," she said. "I'm Brighid. I'm seeking. Well, I'm on a quest, I suppose you'd say." "Aren't we all?" the young man replied with a smile. "I'm Angus, Come in, come in. No need to stand on ceremony here." She followed him into the cottage, and the warmth embraced her like a hug. After the cool night air of the moorland, it was almost overwhelming. The cottage was a single room, but it was cozy and well arranged. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, over which hung an iron pot that bubbled and steamed. A table stood near the fire, already set with wooden bowls and spoons. A bed occupied one corner neatly made. "Sit, please," Angus said, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs at the table. "Let me get you some stew. It's only rabbit and vegetables, but I promise it's good. I've had a lot of practice making stews over the years." Brighid set her pack carefully against the wall, the silver branch chiming softly, and sat. She watched as Angus moved around the small space with easy efficiency, ladling stew into bowls, cutting thick slices from a round of bread, pouring water from a clay pitcher. He set a bowl before her, and the smell made her mouth water. When had she last eaten? At the well with Bowan, but that felt like it had been hours ago, days ago perhaps. Time was so strange here. "Eat," Angus encouraged, sitting across from her with his own bowl. "Don't wait for me. I know you must be famished." The stew was delicious, rich and hearty, with tender meat and vegetables cooked until they melted on the tongue. The bread was good too, dense and filling, perfect for soaking up the broth. Brighid ate with the single-minded focus of someone who had forgotten how hungry they were until food appeared. Angus ate more slowly, watching her with an expression of quiet amusement. "You're not from the Otherworld," he observed. "I can always tell. You eat like someone who's actually hungry, not just going through the motions." Brighid swallowed her mouthful of bread. "I'm from Dunasi. It's a village in the other Ireland, the mortal one." "I know it," Angus said. "I've passed through there once or twice over the years. You have a sacred flame, if I remember correctly. Keeps the whole village warm and safe. That's why I'm here," Brighid said, and found herself telling him the whole story. The dimming flame, the village gathering, her journey through the thresholds, the lessons from Fionnuala and Bowan. It all came pouring out, and Angus listened with complete attention, his blue eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, staring into his bowl. Then he smiled, but it was a sad smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "So you're learning how to tend a sacred flame," he said softly. "How to feed it with memory and connection and care. How to approach it with devotion day after day. That's good, that's important. Ah, but there's something else, isn't there?" "What's that?" Brighid asked. Angus stood and walked to the fire, staring into its depths the way Brighid had stared into her own flame so many times. "A flame doesn't burn on duty alone," he said. "It doesn't burn on routine or responsibility or even devotion, necessary as those things are. It burns on longing, on desire." He turned to look at her, and in the firelight his beauty took on a haunting quality. "Do you know who I am, Brighid of the Hearth?" She shook her head, though something in her was beginning to guess. "I am Angus Og," he said, and yes, that was definitely a capital letter in the name. "Son of the Dagda, one of the Tuatha de Danann. In the old stories they call me the god of love and youth. They say I live in a palace made of sunlight. that I have a golden harp that plays itself, that birds fly around my head singing sweetly." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And maybe that's true sometimes, but tonight I'm just a wanderer, resting in a cottage on the moor, cooking stew and playing harp, and trying not to think too hard about the one I love and cannot have." Brigid's breath caught. She knew this story. Every child in Ireland knew this story. Angus Og and his beloved Care, pronounced Care, who could only take human form one day a year, who lived as a swan the rest of the time. Angus had searched for her for years, and when he found her, he transformed himself into a swan to be with her. And they'd flown away together. But looking at Angus now, sitting alone in this cottage, playing solitary songs on his harp, she realized that the stories didn't tell the whole truth. They didn't mention that even when you found your love, even when you transformed yourself to be with them, there was still longing, still the ache of distance when you were apart. "She's not here?" Brigid asked gently. Not tonight," Angus said. "Tonight she flies with her sisters, her swankin, and I rest here, in this place between worlds, and I wait. I always wait, and while I wait, I tend this fire." He gestured to the hearth. "I cook my meals. I play my music. I remember what it feels like to be with her, and I hold that memory close, and that's what keeps me warm." He returned to the table and sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his years, though Brigid supposed that made no sense for someone who had lived for millennia. "That's the lesson I have for you," he said. "Your flame, the sacred flame you tend, it needs more than routine. It needs longing. It needs the desire to return to it, to be with it, to keep it burning, not because you must, but because you cannot imagine your life without it. Do you understand?" Brigid thought about her flame, about the roundhouse, about the village. Did she long for them? Or had she simply been going through the motions, tending the fire because it was what she did, because it was her role? "I think," she said slowly, "I think I've forgotten how to long for things. I've been so focused on duty, on doing what's expected, that I've lost touch with desire, with want." "That's common among mortals," Angus said. "You're taught that duty is noble and desire is selfish. But desire isn't selfish, not when it's the right kind of desire. The longing for home, for connection, for the work that feeds your soul. That's sacred. That's what keeps you going when duty alone would break you." He stood and went to his harp, running his fingers across the strings. They shimmered with sound, notes that seemed to hang in the air like visible things. When I play," he said, "I'm not just making music. I'm expressing longing, the ache of separation, the joy of reunion, the bittersweet beauty of love that endures despite distance and time. And when people hear my music, they feel their own longing. They remember what they love, what they miss, what they would cross any distance to return to." He played then, and the music filled the cottage. It was the most beautiful thing Brigid had ever heard. Each note was perfect, but it was the way they fit together that made her chest tighten and her eyes sting with tears. The melody spoke of longing, yes, but also of hope. Brighid found herself thinking of the round house, of the sacred flame dancing in its pit, of young Nav's eager face, of Cormac's kindness, of the villagers coming each morning for their bread, their faces familiar and dear. She'd been taking it all for granted, hadn't she? Seeing it as obligation rather than gift. But now, sitting in this cottage with Angus's music washing over her, she felt a fierce longing rise in her chest. She wanted to go home, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The music faded, the last note lingering in the air like a question. Angus set down his harp and looked at her, and his eyes were wet. "You feel it now?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Brighid whispered. "I feel it." "Good," Angus said. He reached up and plucked something from the air near his head. Brighid blinked, and suddenly she could see what she'd missed before. Birds, tiny and made of light, flying in circles around Angus. He caught one gently, and it solidified in his hand, becoming a string of gold, fine and strong. "This is from my harp," he said, offering it to her. "The strings are made of something between gold and light and music itself. When you return to your flame, weave this into something, a bracelet perhaps, or a cord to tie back your hair. And whenever you see it, whenever you touch it, remember this feeling, the longing, the desire to return home." Brighid accepted the string with trembling hands. It was warm and seemed to hum slightly, as though it still held the echo of the music it had made. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you, Angus Og. I understand now. Fionnuala taught me what feeds the flame. Boan taught me how to tend it with devotion. And you've taught me why it matters, why I should want to do this work." "Exactly," Angus said, and his smile was genuine now, reaching his eyes. "Duty tells you what to do. Devotion tells you how to do it. But longing, desire, love, that tells you why. And the why is what sustains you through everything else." They talked long into the night, or what passed for night in this timeless place. Angus told her stories of his long life, of the things he'd seen and the places he'd been, always searching, always longing, always finding his way back to what mattered. When she finally said she should continue her journey, should seek the final threshold, Angus walked her to the door. Outside, Puck was waiting, now in the form of a small fox, its tail wrapped around its paws. "One more threshold," Angus said. "One more lesson. And then you'll have everything you need to rekindle your flame. But Brighid," he paused, his hand on her shoulder, "remember that the lessons don't end when the journey ends. You'll spend the rest of your life learning how to tend your flame, how to deepen your understanding of what it means to care for sacred things. That's not a burden." "I'll remember," Brighid promised. She shouldered her pack, the silver branch chiming, the crystal vial safe, the golden string now tied around her wrist where she could see it always. 3 gifts, 3 lessons, and 1 more to go. Puck stood and stretched, yawning to show sharp teeth. "Come along then, Hearthkeeper. The night grows late, and the 4th threshold waits. This one is the hardest, I should warn you, but also, perhaps, the most important. What is it? Brighid asked. Where are we going? Up, Puck said simply, and pointed with its snout toward the hills. Up to the highest point, where earth meets sky, where you can see forever in all directions. That's where you'll find your final lesson. Brighid looked back once at the cottage. Through the window she could see Angus returning to his harp, settling down to play again, filling the lonely night with beauty and longing and hope. Then she turned and followed Puck up into the hills, toward the final threshold, toward the understanding that would complete her quest and send her home. The path climbed steeply now, winding between rocks and over streams that ran silver in the starlight. The air grew thinner, colder, and Brighid pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, but she didn't mind the cold or the difficulty of the climb. She was thinking of home, of the roundhouse and the flame and the people waiting for her. Upward they went, following the path that only Puck seemed able to see, climbing toward the place where the final lesson waited, where the last piece of understanding would fall into place, where Brighid would learn the final secret of tending sacred flames. The summit was close now. She could feel it, the way you can feel dawn approaching, even before the first light touches the sky. Soon she would stand at the highest point between worlds, and there she would learn what she needed to know to save her flame and return to her people. The silver bells chimed. The crystal vial stayed safe. The golden string gleamed on her wrist, and in her heart a fire burned brighter than it had in years, fed by memory and devotion and longing, pulling her forward, pulling her home. The climb grew harder with each step. The path, such as it was, became little more than a suggestion among the rocks, and Brighid found herself using her hands as much as her feet, scrambling over boulders and pulling herself up steep inclines. Her breath came in harsh gasps, her legs burned, and more than once she considered asking Puck if they could rest. But each time she opened her mouth to speak, she looked up and saw the summit, still distant but closer than before, and something in her refused to stop. The longing Angus had awakened in her heart drove her onward. She wanted to finish this quest, to gather the final lesson, to return home to her flame and her people. That want was stronger than her exhaustion. Puck, who had shifted into the form of a mountain goat, nimble and sure-footed, waited patiently each time Brighid struggled over a particularly difficult section. The creature offered no help, but neither did it mock or hurry her. It simply waited, its yellow eyes watching with something that might have been approval. "You're determined," Puck observed, as Brighid hauled herself over a ledge and collapsed on the flat rock, panting. "Good. You'll need that determination for what's coming." "What is coming?" Brighid asked between breaths. "You keep hinting that this final threshold is different, harder. But you won't say why, because telling you would defeat the purpose," Puck replied. "Some lessons can only be learned by experience, but I will say this. You've learned about memory, about devotion, about longing. The final lesson ties them all together. It's about seeing, really seeing, understanding your place in the great pattern of things." Before Brighid could ask what that meant, Puck turned and continued up the path. With a groan, Brighid pushed herself to her feet and followed. The landscape changed as they climbed higher. The moorland gave way to bare rock, grey and ancient, carved by wind and weather into strange shapes. No plants grew here, not even the hardy heather and gorse. It was cold too, bitter cold, and Brighid's fingers grew numb despite her gloves. The stars overhead seemed close enough to touch, burning with a fierce light that was almost painful to look at directly. And ahead, finally, the summit came into view. It wasn't a peak in the traditional sense. It was a flat plateau of stone, perfectly circular, as though someone had sliced the top off the mountain with a giant blade. In the center of this plateau stood a single figure, tall and motionless, facing the east. Even from a distance, Brighid could see that this was no ordinary being. Light seemed to radiate from the figure, not the warm gold of firelight or the cool silver of starlight, but something in between, something that hurt to look at and yet compelled the eye. The light of the sun itself, concentrated and contained in human form. "Lach," Puck said quietly, and there was something in the shapeshifter's voice that Brighid had never heard before. Respect, perhaps even reverence. Lug of the long arm, master of all skills, the shining one. He stands watch here at the highest point between worlds and sees all that was, all that is, all that might be. Brighid's heart hammered in her chest. She'd heard stories of Luch all her life. The great hero of the Tuatha de Danann, the one who had slain the giant Baylor with a stone from his sling, the one who could master any craft or skill after seeing it performed just once. The greatest of the old gods, some said. The one who stood between the worlds of light and darkness. And now she was supposed to what? Speak with him? Learn from him? "I can't," she whispered. "Puck, I'm just a Hearthkeeper. I'm not worthy to stand before someone like that." "Worthy," Puck snorted. "What a mortal concept. You think the others you've met were somehow less. Fionnuala is older than mountains. Boann shaped rivers with her will. Angus has loved for millennia. And yet they all took time to teach you, didn't they? Because worthiness isn't about what you are. It's about what you're willing to become." The shapeshifter nudged Brighid with its head surprisingly gentle. "Go on. He's expecting you. I'll wait here. This is your threshold to cross." Brighid walked forward on trembling legs. Each step seemed to take an eternity, and yet the distance closed far too quickly. Up close, Lugh was even more overwhelming. He was tall, perhaps 7 feet, with the build of a warrior and the bearing of a king. His hair was the color of sunlight on wheat, bound back with a simple cord. His face was ageless and beautiful, but not soft. This was a face that had seen battle and loss and victory and joy, that had experienced everything the world had to offer and remained unbroken. But it was his eyes that struck Brighid silent. They were the color of the sky at dawn, blue and gold all mixed together, and they saw everything. Not just her surface, not just her thoughts, but all of her, every choice she'd made, every fear she'd hidden, every hope she'd dared to hold. "Brighid," Lugh said, and his voice was like thunder, like bells, like the roar of flame in a great hearth. "Welcome to the summit of sight. You have journeyed far and learned much, but your lessons are not complete." "No, my lord," Brighid managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not lord," Lugh corrected, and there was almost amusement in his tone. "Just Lugh. We are not so different, you and I. I too tend fires. I too keep watch. I too serve something greater than myself. The difference is only in scale, not in essence." He turned to face her fully, and the weight of his gaze was almost too much to bear. But Brighid forced herself to meet it, to not look away. "You have learned that your flame feeds on memory and connection and care," Lugh said. "You have learned that it requires daily devotion, the choice to tend it anew each morning. You have learned that it burns on longing, on the desire to return home and keep the light alive. These are all true lessons, all important." He raised his hand, and suddenly the world changed. Brighid gasped. She was still standing on the summit, but now she could see, truly see. The plateau was no longer isolated. It was connected, part of a vast network of light that stretched across Ireland, across the world, across all the worlds. Lines of power ran like rivers through the earth, and at every crossing point, at every confluence, a light burned. Hearth fires, sacred flames, and her flame the sacred flame of Dun Nasi. She could see it, a small point of light among the thousands, dimming, yes, but not alone. Never alone. "Do you see?" Lugh asked. "Yes," Brighid breathed, tears streaming down her face. "I see. Your flame is not just your flame," Lugh said. "It is part of the great web of light that holds the world together. When one fire dims, all fires feel it. When one burns bright, all fires are strengthened. You tend your small flame in your small village, and you think it doesn't matter that you're just one person doing one small thing. But look." Brighid looked, and she saw how her flame connected to others. She saw the lines of light running from Dun Nasi to other villages, other hearths, other keepers. And she saw something else too. She saw how her flame was fed not just by her own care and devotion, but by the care and devotion of all the other keepers, all the other fires. It was a network, a web, each point supporting all the others, each light making all the other lights possible. "The sacred flame doesn't belong to your village alone," Lugh continued. "It belongs to everyone. To the people who warm themselves by it, yes, but also to every other fire, every other keeper, every other person who tends light anywhere in the world. You are all connected. You are all part of the same great work." He swept his arm across the vista, and Brighid saw more. She saw the fires burning in the halls of the cedar, eternal and bright. She saw the flames in mortal hearths, smaller but no less important. She saw the fire of the sun itself, source of all light, all warmth, all life. "This is what you must remember," Lugh said, and his voice was gentler now. "When you tend your flame, you are not working alone. You are part of something vast and ancient and beautiful. Your small actions matter because all actions matter. Your devotion strengthens not just your own fire, but all fires everywhere. And when you doubt, when you feel small and insignificant, when the work seems too hard and the darkness too deep, remember this moment." The vision faded slowly, the connections dimming until Brighid was once again standing on a cold mountaintop under the stars, facing a being of immense power who looked at her with something like fondness. "The others gave you gifts," Lugh said. "Fionnuala gave you bells to remind your people to pause and remember. Bohan gave you water to help you choose devotion each day. Angus gave you music to keep longing alive in your heart. I have a gift for you as well." He reached up and seemed to pluck something from the sky itself. When he opened his hand, a stone rested on his palm. It was small and round, perfectly smooth, and it glowed with an inner light that shifted and changed, sometimes golden, sometimes silver, sometimes 100 colors all at once. "Ah, a sunstone," Lugh said. "It holds light within it, light that never fades, never dims, never goes out. When you return to your village, place this at the base of your sacred flame. It will serve as a reminder of what you've seen here, of the great web of light that connects all fires. And in moments of darkness, when all seems lost, look at it and remember, you are not alone." Brighid accepted the stone with shaking hands. It was warm, almost hot, and it pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, like the heartbeat of the sun itself, captured and contained in this small, perfect sphere. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Lugh of the long arm. I will remember. I promise I will remember." Lugh smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm. "I know you will, Brighid of Dun Nasi. You have proven yourself a true keeper of flame, a guardian of light. Return to your people now. Return to your fire." He paused, and his expression grew more serious. "But know this, the lessons you have learned on this journey, they are not lessons you learn once and then forget. They are lessons you will spend the rest of your life deepening, understanding more fully with each passing year. Memory, devotion, longing, connection. These are not simple things. They are the work of a lifetime." "I understand," Brighid said. "Or I'm beginning to understand. I know I have so much more to learn." "That," Lugh said, "is the mark of wisdom. The wise know how much they don't know. The foolish think they know everything. You will be a great Hearthkeeper, Brighid, not because you know all the answers, but because you're willing to keep asking the questions." He raised his hand in farewell, and Brighid bowed deeply, clutching the sunstone to her chest. When she straightened, Lugh had turned back to the east, resuming his eternal watch, and she knew she had been dismissed. She walked back to where Puck waited, and the shapeshifter looked up at her with knowing eyes. "You saw," it said. "It wasn't a question." "I saw," Brighid confirmed. "And now you understand why this was the final threshold, why I said it was the hardest. Because it's one thing to tend a fire," Brighid said slowly, working through the understanding even as she spoke it. "It's another thing entirely to understand what that fire means, to see how it connects to everything else, to know that your small actions ripple outward in ways you can't imagine." "Almost," Puck agreed, "but not quite. Because you're not carrying it alone, are you? That's the whole point. You're part of the web now, connected to every other keeper, every other fire. They carry you, and you carry them." Brighid nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The 4 gifts hung heavy on her, the silver branch with its bells, the crystal vial of well water, the golden harp string on her wrist, and now the sunstone warm in her hand. Each one a reminder, each one a lesson, each one a key to understanding how to save her sacred flame. "Come," Puck said, standing and shaking out its fur. "The journey down is always faster than the journey up, and your time in the Otherworld is nearly at an end. You have what you came for, now you must return and use it." They descended the mountain as the sky began to lighten, though whether it was dawn in the Otherworld or simply a shift in the eternal twilight, Brighid couldn't say. The path that had been so difficult to climb was easier going down, and her feet seemed to find the way without conscious thought. As they walked, Brighid found herself reviewing everything she'd learned, memory and connection and care from Fionnuala, daily devotion and attention from Boan, longing and desire from Angus, and from Lug, the understanding that all of it was connected, that her small fire was part of something vast and infinite. How did it all fit together? How would she use these lessons to rekindle her flame? The answer came to her as they reached the bottom of the mountain and stepped back into the green gold light of the Threshold Woods. She would do what she'd always done, but she would do it differently. She would tend the flame each morning, but she would do it with full attention, with devotion, with love. She would gather her people and help them remember their connection to the fire, to each other, to the great web of light. She would keep longing alive in her heart, the desire to return each day and tend this sacred trust. It was so simple and so profound. They reached the hawthorn tree as the first true light of dawn touched the sky. The watching tree stood exactly as it had when Brighid first arrived, ancient and patient and aware. "This is where we part," Puck said, and there was something like regret in the shapeshifter's voice. "You've been a good companion, Hearthkeeper, honest and humble and willing to learn. The Otherworld needs more visitors like you." "Thank you, Puck," Brighid said, kneeling to hug the creature, which had settled back into the form of a hare. "Thank you for guiding me, for teaching me, for helping me find what I needed." "Just doing what pleases me," Puck replied, but its eyes were warm. "And what pleases me is helping honest seekers find their way. Now go. Your people are waiting, your flame is waiting, and you have work to do." Brighid stood and faced the tree. "How do I get back?" "The same way you came," Puck said. "With honest intent. Tell the tree what you need." Brighid placed her hand on the rough bark of the hawthorn. "I'm Brighid," she said. "I came seeking help for my sacred flame, and I found it. Now I need to go home. Please, will you let me pass?" The world shimmered, the light shifted, and Brighid felt the strange sensation of turning a corner in reality. The green gold forest faded, replaced by the ordinary morning light of the mortal world. The sounds of the Otherworld, the not-quite birds in the uphill streams, gave way to the familiar sounds of home. Sheep bleating in the distance, a dog barking. She was standing in the field by the hawthorn tree, exactly where she'd started. The sun was just rising over the eastern hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and in the distance down the road, She could see the smoke rising from the chimneys of Dunasi. Home. Brigid's heart swelled with such fierce longing that she had to stop and catch her breath. Home, her village, her people, her flame. She shouldered her pack, adjusted the gifts so they wouldn't be damaged, and began to walk, not running, though she wanted to. Walking with purpose and dignity, the way a Hearthkeeper should walk. The road seemed shorter than she remembered, or perhaps she was walking faster than she thought. Before she knew it, she was passing the first cottages, and people were emerging to stare at her with wide eyes. "Brigid!" someone shouted. "She's back! Brigid has returned!" The word spread like wildfire, and by the time she reached the roundhouse, what seemed like the entire village had gathered. Cormac was there, and Finian, and young Neve, who burst through the crowd and threw herself at Brigid with a cry of joy. "You came back!" Niamh sobbed into Brigid's cloak. "You came back. I knew you would. I knew it. But I was so worried." "Of course I came back," Brigid said, hugging the girl tightly. "I promised, didn't I?" She looked over Neve's head at Cormac, and the question was clear in her eyes. The flame. Cormac's expression was grave. "Still burning," he said, "but barely. Another day, perhaps 2, and it would have gone out completely." "Then we have no time to waste," Brigid said, gently disentangling herself from Niamh. "Gather everyone in the village. I need them all here, now. What I have to do, we have to do together. The flame doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to all of us." As the villagers hurried to spread the word, to gather the community, Brigid stepped into the roundhouse and approached the sacred flame for the first time since her journey began. It was worse than she'd feared. The fire was little more than embers now, barely glowing, giving off almost no heat and only the faintest light. Looking at it hurt like seeing a beloved friend wasting away from illness. But Brigid didn't despair. She had what she needed. She had the lessons. She had the gifts. And most importantly, she had understanding. The sacred flame could be saved, would be saved, because she wasn't working alone. She was part of the great web of light, connected to every fire, every keeper, every point of warmth in the darkness, and together she and her people would bring their flame back to brilliant, beautiful life. The villagers gathered slowly, filling the roundhouse until it could hold no more, with people spilling out into the late morning sun. They came quietly, reverently, sensing that something important was about to happen. Old and young, families and solitary folk, the prosperous and the struggling. Brigid stood by the dying flame, her pack at her feet, and looked at the faces surrounding her. These were her people. She'd baked bread for them, tended their sick fires, welcomed their children. She'd served them for 10 years, but had she truly seen them? She saw them now, really saw them, the way Lug had taught her to see. She saw the web of relationships, the invisible threads of care and connection that tied them all together. Cormac and his wife, who'd been married 40 years and still held hands when they walked. Neve and her uncle, who'd raised her after her parents died. Finian and his grandson, 3 generations linked by blood and love. Ma the weaver and Deirdre the baker, best friends since childhood. "Thank you for coming," Brighid said, and her voice carried in the hushed roundhouse. "I know you're worried. I know you're afraid." She paused, letting the silence settle. "I went seeking help in the Otherworld. I crossed the threshold and walked between the worlds, and I met with the Tuatha De Danann, the ancient ones who gave us this flame. And they taught me things, important things, things I need to share with all of you before we can bring our flame back to life." Cormac stepped forward. "What did they teach you?" Brighid knelt by her pack and began removing the gifts, laying them out on the stones with care. The silver branch with its bells, the crystal vial of water, the golden harp string on her wrist, the sunstone that glowed with inner light. "They taught me that a sacred flame doesn't burn on wood alone," she said. "It burns on memory, on connection, on care, on devotion, on longing, on understanding, and most of all, it burns on all of us together. Not just one Hearthkeeper doing her duty, but a whole community choosing every day to keep the light alive." She picked up the silver branch, and its bells chimed softly in the quiet. "Fionnuala of the Cedar gave me this, a branch from the silver apple tree in the Otherworld. She taught me that our flame feeds on memory and connection and care. It feeds on the stories we tell around it, the warmth we share, the deliberate choice to tend it with love." She looked around the room, meeting eyes. "When did we stop doing that? When did taking coals from the sacred flame become just a chore, something we did without thinking? When did we stop gathering here to tell stories, to share our lives, to remember why this flame matters?" There was an uncomfortable shifting in the crowd. Brighid saw the recognition on their faces, the acknowledgement of a truth they'd been avoiding. "I'm not blaming anyone," Brighid said gently. "I'm the Hearthkeeper, and I forgot too. I tended the flame because it was my duty, because it was what I did. But I stopped seeing it, really seeing it." She set down the silver branch and picked up the crystal vial. "Boankeeper of Conla's Well gave me this. Water from the sacred well, pure and clear. She taught me that care isn't just a feeling, it's action. It's the choice to show up day after day, to do the small things with attention and devotion, not because they're exciting or new, but because they matter." Brighid uncorked the vial, and the scent of pure water filled the roundhouse, fresh and clean and alive. "When I return to tending this flame, I won't just go through the motions anymore. Every action will be a prayer. Every gesture will be deliberate." She corked the vial and touched the golden string on her wrist. "Angus Og, the Wanderer, gave me this, a string from his harp made of gold and light and music. He taught me that a flame burns on longing, on desire, not just duty or devotion, but the active wanting to be here, to do this work, to keep this light alive." Her voice grew softer, more intimate. "I realized something in his cottage. I'd been tending the flame, yes, but I'd stopped longing for it. I'd stopped feeling that pull toward home, that desire to return each day. It had become routine rather than choice. But longing, wanting, loving what you do, that's what sustains you when duty alone would break you." She let her hand fall from the string and picked up the sunstone. It pulsed in her palm, warm and bright, and people gasped at the sight of it. "Lugh of the Long Arm gave me this," Brighid said, and her voice trembled with the weight of what she'd seen. "Lugh, who stands watch at the highest point between worlds, he showed me something I'll never forget. He showed me that our flame, our small flame in our small village, is connected to every other fire in the world. She stood, cradling the sunstone, and turned slowly so everyone could see the light pulsing within it like a heartbeat. Our flame isn't alone. We aren't alone. When we tend this fire, we're not just keeping our village warm. We're strengthening every fire everywhere. We're part of something vast and ancient and beautiful. And that means when we work to rekindle this flame, we're not working alone either. The silence in the roundhouse was profound. Brighid could see tears on some faces, recognition on others, and on all of them, a dawning understanding of what they'd lost and what they might reclaim. "So," Brighid said, setting the sunstone carefully on the hearthstones, "here's what I'm asking. I can't rekindle this flame alone. No Hearthkeeper can. A sacred flame belongs to everyone, and everyone must help tend it. I need you all to help me. Not just today, but every day from now on. I need you to remember why this flame matters. I need you to choose deliberately to care for it. I need you to long for it, to want it to keep burning." Cormac stepped forward first. "Tell us what to do." Brighid looked at the dying embers, barely glowing now, and felt the lessons settling into place in her mind. "We're going to rebuild the fire together, but not in the usual way. We're going to do it with intention, with memory, with devotion. Each of you will add something to the flame, but as you do, you'll speak. You'll share a memory of what this fire has meant to you, a story of warmth or safety or community. And as we build the flame together, we'll be feeding it what it truly needs." She knelt by the fire pit and took a deep breath. "I'll go first." From her pack, she pulled out a piece of wood she'd carried all the way from the Otherworld. It was a branch from one of the hazel trees at Conla's Well, given to her by Boarn. She placed it carefully on the embers. "Ah, I remember," Brighid said, her voice clear and strong. "The first time old Morna let me tend the sacred flame alone. I was 16 years old and terrified I'd do something wrong, but she trusted me. She said the flame chose me, and she was right. This flame has been my teacher, my companion, my purpose. It's given me a way to serve, a way to care for people, a way to matter. I tend this flame because I love it, because I cannot imagine my life without it." The hazelwood caught just barely, a small flicker of flame rising from the embers. Brighid uncorked the crystal vial and let 3 drops of water fall onto the flame. It hissed and steamed, and the flame grew slightly brighter. She stood and gestured to Neve. "Come, child, at your peace." Niamh approached, with a small bundle of kindling she'd gathered, her hands shaking. She laid it carefully on the growing flame. "I remember," Niamh said, her young voice wavering but determined. "Coming here every morning since I was old enough to walk. I remember watching Brighid bake bread and thinking it was magic. The way the dough rose and turned golden. I remember being cold one winter night when I was little, and my mother brought me here, and Brighid wrapped me in a blanket and gave me warm milk and let me sleep by the fire. I remember feeling safe. I remember feeling loved. This flame, it's like a grandmother to all of us. The kindling caught, and the flame grew brighter still. Tears streamed down Niamh's face, but she was smiling. One by one, the villagers came forward. Each brought wood. Each shared a memory. Cormac spoke of the day he was chosen as village leader, how the ceremony had taken place here, around this fire, and how he'd felt the weight of responsibility settle on him like a cloak, but also the warmth of community support. Mare the Weaver remembered teaching her daughter to spin by this fire, the two of them sitting close to the warmth, their hands moving in rhythm, creating something beautiful together. Deirdre the baker shared the memory of her wedding feast held here in the round house, the sacred flame blessing her union, the whole village celebrating around its light. Finian, helped forward by his grandson, spoke in his creaky voice of a winter 70 years ago, when snow had buried the village and people had sheltered here for 3 days, kept alive by this flame and the community it fostered. Young Oisin remembered being a child and believing the flame was alive, that it watched over him and kept monsters away. On and on they came, each with their piece of wood, each with their memory. The flame grew with each offering, fed not just by the fuel, but by the love and care and memory being spoken into being. It grew brighter, warmer, the grey edges fading, the sluggish movement becoming lively dance once more. Brighid watched with tears streaming down her face. This was it. This was what Fionnuala and Bowen and Angus and Lug had been trying to teach her. A sacred flame didn't burn on one person's devotion. It burned on community, on shared memory, on collective care. She was the Hearthkeeper, yes, but the flame belonged to everyone. When the last villager had added their wood and shared their memory, the flame was burning bright and strong, almost back to its former glory. But not quite. There was still something missing, one final element. Brighid picked up the sunstone and held it high, so everyone could see. Lug gave me this to remind us that we're part of something bigger, that our flame connects to all flames, that our light strengthens all light. When I place this at the base of our fire, it will anchor us to that great web, will help us remember that we're never alone in this work. She knelt and pressed the sunstone into the earth at the fire pit's edge. The moment it touched the ground, something changed. The flame surged upward, brilliant and beautiful, burning with colours Brighid had never seen before. Gold and silver and blue and white, all dancing together, all part of one glorious whole. And in that moment, Brighid saw them. Shadows around the fire, or perhaps not shadows, but presences. The ghost memory of every Hearthkeeper who had ever tended this flame, every person who had gathered here, every story told and song sung and life lived in this place. They were all there, all present, all part of the flame's life. She saw old Morna, smiling with pride. She saw the woman who had brought the first coal from the Otherworld, her face fierce and determined. She saw countless others stretching back through 300 years of tending and caring and keeping the light alive, and beyond them, reaching out in all directions, she saw the web Luke had shown her. Lines of light connecting this flame to others, and those to others still, spreading across Ireland, across the world, an infinite network of light pushing back the darkness. The vision faded, but the understanding remained. The flame burned bright and true now, stronger than it had been in years. The warmth spread through the round house, and people sighed with relief and joy. Brighid hung the silver branch from a hook above the fire pit, where its bells would chime whenever anyone entered the roundhouse, a reminder to pause and remember. She placed the crystal vial on the hearthstones, where she would see it each morning when she added the 3 drops of sacred water. "I thank you," she said to the gathered villagers. "Thank you for helping me save our flame. But more than that, thank you for helping me understand what it really means to be a Hearthkeeper. I can't do this alone. I shouldn't do this alone. From now on, this flame belongs to all of us. We'll tend it together." Cormac stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll have a gathering here once a month. Everyone in the village. We'll share stories, share food, share warmth. We'll remember together why this flame matters. And I'll bring the children," Neve said eagerly. "I'll teach them the stories the way Brighid will teach me. So the knowledge passes on, so no one forgets. One by one, people made commitments to visit the flame more often, to take their coals with gratitude rather than habit, to teach their children about the sacred trust of keeping light alive, to remember that they were part of something bigger than themselves." As the crowd began to disperse, heading home for their midday meals, Brighid sat alone by the rekindled flame. She was exhausted, bone-tired from her journey and the emotional weight of the rekindling, but she was also more at peace than she'd been in years. The flame danced before her, bright and beautiful, fed by wood and air and spark, yes, but also by memory and devotion and longing and understanding, fed by a whole community choosing together to keep the light alive. She thought of Fionnuala in her hall of eternal twilight, teaching the lesson of memory and connection. She thought of Boann at her well, showing the sacred in daily repetition. She thought of Angus in his cottage, burning with longing for what he loved. She thought of Lugh on his summit, seeing how all things connected in the great web of light. They had given her everything she needed, not just gifts and lessons, but understanding, the deep bone-level knowledge that tending a sacred flame was the most important work in the world and also the simplest. It was about showing up, about caring, about choosing to keep the light alive, day after day with all your heart. "Thank you," Brighid whispered to the flame, to the gifts, to the memory of her teachers. "Thank you for showing me the way." The flame crackled softly, as though in response, and in its dancing light, Brighid thought she saw, just for a moment, 4 figures. A woman with silver hair, an old woman with a staff, a young man with a harp, a warrior made of light. She sat with the fire as the afternoon wore on, not doing anything, just being present. Just watching and listening and feeling grateful. The silver bells chimed occasionally when someone passed through. The sunstone pulsed with its steady light. The crystal vial caught the firelight and threw rainbow colors on the walls. Everything was as it should be. Everything was in its place. The flame burned bright. The people were safe. the work would continue. Eventually, young Neve returned with a basket of food. "Thought you might be hungry," she said shyly. "And I wanted to ask. You said you'd take me as your apprentice. Did you mean it?" Brighid smiled and gestured for the girl to sit beside her. "I meant it. Starting tomorrow, you'll begin learning the Hearthkeeper's craft. It won't be easy. It's work that never ends, that requires patience and devotion and love. But it's also the most rewarding work there is." "I'm ready," Neve said, and the determination in her young face reminded Brighid of herself at that age. "I want to learn. I want to help keep the flame alive." "Then you will," Brighid said. "And someday, when I'm old, you'll be the Hearthkeeper, and you'll teach someone else, and the flame will continue burning, tended by loving hands, kept alive by people who choose every day to push back the darkness with light." They sat together in companionable silence, teacher and student, keeper and future keeper, two links in a chain that stretched back 300 years and would stretch forward for 300 more. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the western hills. Inside, the sacred flame burned bright and steady, a point of light in the gathering dusk, and Brighid, Hearthkeeper of Dun Nasi, keeper of sacred flame, student of the Otherworld, sat and watched and felt for the first time in longer than she could remember, completely and utterly content. The journey was over, the lessons were learned, the flame was saved. But really, Brighid knew, the journey was just beginning. Every day would be a new lesson, a new opportunity to deepen her understanding of what it meant to tend sacred fire. Every morning would bring a chance to choose devotion anew. It was simple work, ancient work, sacred work, and it was hers. The flame danced on, fed by wood and air and love, connecting this small village to the great web of light that held the world together. And Brighid tended it, as she would tend it tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days to come, with memory, with devotion, with longing, with understanding, with her whole heart. The end. And that, my dear friends, is where we'll end tonight's story. I hope you enjoyed this gentle journey through Ireland's mythological landscape, and I hope it reminded you that the small things we do with love and care are never really small at all. Until next time, stay warm by whatever fire lights your life, and sweet dreams.